You think you know someone until they surprise you. Jack Anderson had always prided himself on being able to read people. As the CEO of a multi-billion-dollar tech company, he had built his empire by staying 3 steps ahead of everyone else. His success wasn't just due to his genius in technology. It was his ability to size up people in seconds. That's why when he walked into the exclusive restaurant in Manhattan and saw Christina Matthews, the waitress, he immediately pegged her as just another quiet, unremarkable server. But today, that perception was about to change. Jack had just ordered a steak and a bottle of the finest wine. He didn't expect much more than the usual pleasantries from Christina. The restaurant was filled with the hum of conversations, the clink of glasses, and the occasional laughter of the city's elite. But Jack wasn't paying attention to any of it. He was focused on his phone, scrolling through emails, mentally preparing for the negotiations that would determine the future of his company. As he placed his order, he barely looked up. "I'll take the steak, medium rare," he muttered, still absorbed in his phone. "And a bottle of the Bordeaux, please." Christina, with her warm honey-colored eyes and neat black apron, nodded politely, jotting down his order. She didn't rush. She never did. There was something about her calm demeanor that made her stand out in a place where people often tried too hard to be noticed. Jack barely gave it a second thought. He was too busy. Moments later, as Christina returned with the wine, she set it down in front of him, her expression as professional as always. "Is there anything else I can get for you, Mr. Anderson?" she asked, her voice soft but confident. He glanced up at her, already prepared to brush her off, but then something caught his ear. The conversation at the table next to him was in Arabic. Jack leaned in, straining to catch the words, trying to make out the details of what was being said. It was a business deal, something important, but he couldn't understand a single word. Frustrated, he turned to Christina. "Could you translate for me? I don't speak Arabic." Christina didn't miss a beat. She glanced over at the table where the conversation was still going on. "Actually," she said, "he's insulting you." Jack froze, his eyes narrowing in confusion. "What?" "The gentleman is saying you're not competent enough to handle this deal," Christina explained, her tone level. "And he's mocking you in Arabic." Jack's jaw dropped. He had expected a polite, obedient server. What he got was a sharp, confident woman who had just thrown him into a mental whirlwind. How could she possibly know that? He stared at her, disbelief and curiosity flickering across his face. "You speak Arabic?" he asked, his voice low. She smiled slightly, a glint of something mysterious in her eyes. "Yes, I do," she replied, her voice still calm. Jack couldn't hide his surprise. He had been wrong about her, dead wrong. But he wasn't about to let her know just how stunned he was. Instead, he took a moment to compose himself, then smiled. "I didn't expect that," he said, trying to regain his composure. "I didn't think a waitress would be able to do that." Christina simply nodded, her eyes never leaving his. "I think you'd be surprised by what people are capable of, Mr. Anderson." Jack leaned back in his chair, his mind racing. He had just experienced something that not only caught him off guard, but made him reevaluate everything he thought he knew about people like Christina. This wasn't just a waitress. She was far more than that. Jack sat back, his mind racing. Christina had just thrown him off balance in a way no one ever had before. She wasn't just another face in the crowd of staff members that he had learned to ignore over the years. There was something different about her. Jack tried to shake the feeling, but it clung to him. He picked up his wine glass and stared at his reflection, wondering if he had been too quick to judge. His thoughts were interrupted when Christina returned to his table. This time, there was no sign of the faint smile she had worn before. Her expression was neutral, businesslike. "Is everything to your liking, Mr. Anderson?" she asked, her voice professional, but with a subtle undertone that made Jack realize she wasn't just doing her job, she was in control of this moment. "Yes," Jack replied, his voice slightly strained as he tried to collect himself. "But I'm curious, Christina, where did you learn to speak Arabic?" She glanced around the room for a moment, then met his gaze with an almost imperceptible shrug. "I studied it for a while," she said simply. "At college, but I had to leave. Life got in the way." Jack leaned forward, intrigued. He could tell there was more to the story, but Christina wasn't giving him much. "What do you mean by life got in the way?" he asked, pushing gently. Christina's eyes flickered with a momentary shadow, but she quickly masked it, returning to her calm composure. "I had to take care of my family," she said quietly. There was a pause. Jack wanted to press further, but something in her tone told him not to. Instead, he changed the subject. So, you just happened to be here, working as a waitress? Christina didn't answer immediately. She picked up the bottle of wine, refilled his glass, and then placed it back down, her movements precise and graceful. I'm here because I need to be, she replied finally, her gaze never leaving his. Jack couldn't help but feel a sense of awe at the way she carried herself, confident, yet humble. It wasn't just the languages she spoke or her knowledge that had caught his attention. It was the way she navigated the world around her. She wasn't someone who needed to boast or prove herself. She was quietly formidable. You're more than just a waitress, aren't you? Jack said, half to himself, his voice filled with genuine curiosity. Christina's eyes softened for just a moment before she spoke again. I'm exactly what I need to be right now. Her response was so simple, yet it held so much weight. It was clear to Jack that Christina had a life he couldn't even begin to understand, and she was doing whatever it took to make things work. He respected that, more than he wanted to admit. Jack found himself leaning back in his chair, pondering the situation. He had spent his life building an empire, assuming that he had all the answers. But now, sitting in front of Christina, he realized there was still so much he didn't know. She was a puzzle, a mystery, and the more he tried to figure her out, the more he found himself drawn to her. It wasn't just her intelligence or the way she handled herself under pressure. It was the quiet strength in her eyes, the way she refused to let anyone define her. He found himself wondering, what else was she hiding? Jack sat quietly for a moment, absorbing everything Christina had said. There was something about her words that lingered in his mind. She wasn't just a waitress. She wasn't just someone who served food and cleared tables. She had a story, one that was still unfolding, and Jack found himself more and more intrigued by it. He couldn't remember the last time someone had caught his attention like this. No, not just caught it, but held it. Christina had a way of disarming him. The way she didn't try to impress him, but simply existed with such quiet confidence. He had always prided himself on being able to read people, but with her, he was at a loss. As he sat there, the weight of his thoughts pressing down on him, Christina returned to the table with a new plate of food. She placed it gently in front of him, her fingers brushing against the edges of the plate with practiced ease. I hope you're enjoying your evening so far, Mr. Anderson, she said, her voice as calm as always, though there was something deeper in her tone now. Jack nodded, still distracted by his thoughts. It's been a pleasant evening, Christina. I didn't expect this, he admitted, motioning between the two of them. What do you mean? Christina asked, her brow furrowing slightly. Jack looked up at her, a slight smile tugging at the corners of his lips. I didn't expect to meet someone like you tonight, he said honestly. You've surprised me. Christina's eyes softened, and for a moment, she didn't say anything. She simply looked at him, as though weighing her words carefully. Not everyone is what they seem, Mr. Anderson, she said, her voice thoughtful. I've learned that the hard way. Jack raised an eyebrow, intrigued by the hint of vulnerability in her voice. He wanted to ask more, but something told him not to push. Not yet. The silence between them stretched for a moment before Christina broke it again, her smile returning, this time with a touch of amusement. I guess we all have our stories, she said. But for now, I'm just a waitress, doing my job. Jack nodded, but his curiosity didn't let go. There was so much more to Christina than she was letting on. He could feel it in the way she held herself, in the way she spoke. She wasn't just a waitress. She was someone with a purpose, someone who had something to offer far beyond the confines of her job. You're more than that, Jack said softly, almost to himself. Christina paused, looking at him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Maybe, she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. But for now, this is who I am. Jack found himself wanting to argue, to tell her she was wrong, but he didn't. Instead, he simply nodded, respecting the boundaries she had set, even though his mind was still reeling with questions. As Christina turned to leave, Jack sat there, his thoughts swirling. He had met many people in his life, but none who had made him feel this, uncertain. He had always been the one in control, the one who knew exactly what was happening around him. But with Christina, he felt like he was standing on the edge of something he couldn't quite grasp. And for the first time in a long while, that unsettled him. Jack couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more to Christina than what she was letting on. As the evening went on, he found his thoughts drifting back to her. How she had spoken so effortlessly, how she had caught him off guard, and how she remained composed despite everything. There was something deeply intriguing about her, something Jack couldn't quite place. After a while, he decided to do something he had never done before, ask for a private conversation. "Christina," he called out as she walked by his table. She paused, turned, and approached him. Her eyes were calm, but Jack could tell there was a flicker of curiosity in them. "Mr. Anderson?" she asked, her voice steady, as though this was a routine part of her job. "Please, call me Jack," he said, motioning to the empty chair across from him. She hesitated for a moment before sitting down, her posture still. "Perfect," her hands folded neatly in her lap. "What's on your mind?" she asked, her voice soft but alert. Jack studied her for a moment, weighing his words. "I've been thinking about what you said earlier, about how you're just a waitress, doing your job." He paused, then added, "I don't buy that." Christina raised an eyebrow, clearly intrigued. "You don't buy it?" she repeated, her voice tinged with amusement. "No," Jack said, leaning forward slightly. "There's more to you than that. I can tell. You're too capable to just be doing this job for the sake of it." Christina smiled faintly, but there was no sign of the surprise Jack expected. Instead, she simply nodded. "You're right," she said, her voice low. "There's more to me than what you see." Jack's curiosity piqued. "So what is it that you're not saying?" She met his gaze, her expression unreadable. "I'm not saying anything because it's not relevant," she replied. "I've made peace with where I am in life. It's where I need to be right now." Jack wasn't satisfied with that answer. He leaned forward a little more, his eyes locking onto hers. "But it's not where you want to be, is it?" Christina paused, and for a brief moment, Jack saw something flicker behind her eyes, something he hadn't seen before. It was vulnerability, a crack in the armor she had so carefully built. "No," she admitted softly. "It's not where I want to be. But sometimes, life doesn't give us the luxury of choosing." Jack felt a pang of empathy for her, something he hadn't expected. He had always been the one in control, the one who made choices, who took charge of his destiny. But Christina? She seemed to have learned to live with the cards she was dealt, even if they weren't the hand she would have chosen. "I understand that more than you know," Jack said quietly. There was a long silence between them as they both processed what had been said. Christina's eyes softened slightly, and for a moment, she wasn't the waitress serving him. She was just a person, like him, someone who had struggles, dreams, and a past she wasn't ready to share. "I'm not asking for your sympathy, Jack," she said finally, breaking the silence. "I'm just doing what I can to get by." Jack nodded, his respect for her growing with every word she spoke. He leaned back in his chair, letting the conversation settle in. There was so much more to Christina than he had originally thought, and Jack found himself wondering if, just maybe, he had underestimated her in more ways than one. As Jack sat back, he found himself reflecting on the conversation he had just shared with Christina. He hadn't expected such a candid moment with a waitress, someone he had initially dismissed as just another face in the crowd. But there was more to her, something real, something that caught him off guard. His thoughts were interrupted when Christina returned, this time with a fresh round of drinks. She placed the glass down in front of him, her movements still graceful, yet there was something different about her today, something more vulnerable. "Thank you," Jack said, meeting her eyes for a moment. Christina nodded, offering a small smile, but this time, it didn't reach her eyes. "You've been quiet tonight," Jack observed, noticing the shift in her demeanor. "Is everything all right?" Christina hesitated, then let out a soft sigh, her gaze drifting to the side for a moment. "It's just, sometimes it's easier not to talk about certain things," she said, her voice soft. Jack could sense that there was more beneath the surface, and for the first time, he didn't want to push her. He respected her space, something he rarely did with anyone, but there was an undeniable connection that was making him question everything he thought he knew about people. "I understand," Jack replied, his voice calm, almost reassuring. "But if you ever feel like talking, I'm here." Christina didn't respond immediately, but Jack could see the wheels turning in her mind. She had always been so guarded, so careful about what she revealed. He could feel that, like him, she had spent years building walls around herself. But as the night wore on, Jack found himself wanting to break through them, wanting to understand the person behind the mask. The rest of the evening passed in relative silence, with Jack finishing his meal in quiet contemplation, occasionally exchanging glances with Christina. There was a shift in the air between them, a recognition of sorts that neither had been expecting. The connection was undeniable, and though they both remained silent for most of the night, there was an unspoken understanding. When it was finally time for Jack to leave, he stood up, slipping on his jacket, and for the first time all evening, he felt like he wasn't in complete control. There was something about Christina that left him unsettled in the best way possible. He walked over to the counter to pay, and as he did, he glanced back at her. "I'll be back," he said, his voice steady but with a hint of something else. Christina looked up, meeting his gaze for the briefest of moments. She didn't say anything, but the look in her eyes told him everything he needed to know. "Take care, Mr. Anderson," she replied, her tone almost warm. Jack paused for a moment, then nodded, turning to leave the restaurant. As he stepped out into the cool Manhattan night, he couldn't shake the feeling that this encounter had changed something in him. He had come to the restaurant expecting just another meal, just another evening of routine business dealings. But instead, he found himself intrigued by a waitress who had managed to turn his world upside down, even without trying. He knew this wasn't the last time he'd see her. He couldn't help but wonder, what was she hiding? And more importantly, what was he going to do about it? The next few days passed in a blur for Jack. His mind kept drifting back to that night at the restaurant, to Christina and her quiet strength. He found himself going over their conversation again and again, analyzing every word she had said, every glance they shared. There was something about her, something that both intrigued and unsettled him. He couldn't put his finger on it, but he knew he wanted to know more. Christina had been right, though. She wasn't interested in talking about her past, and Jack respected that. But there was something in the way she carried herself, something that told him there was more to her story. That's why, 2 days later, he found himself back at the same restaurant. He had tried to push the thought of her out of his mind, but every time he walked past the place, he couldn't resist the pull. As he stepped inside, the familiar scent of fine dining hit him, but it was Christina's presence that caught his attention first. She was there, behind the bar, wiping down glasses, her movements fluid and efficient. She looked up as he entered, her gaze meeting his with a hint of recognition. For a moment, neither of them said anything. Jack took a step forward, then paused, unsure of what to say. Christina, however, didn't seem to hesitate. "Back again, Mr. Anderson?" she asked, her voice calm, but there was a slight smile on her lips. Jack smiled back, a little unsure of himself. "I guess I couldn't stay away," he said. "I've been thinking a lot about our conversation the other night." Christina raised an eyebrow, but said nothing. Jack continued, his voice a little quieter. "I meant what I said. I'm genuinely interested in who you are, Christina, not just the waitress behind the bar." She didn't answer right away, but her expression softened. She studied him for a moment, her eyes flicking to the side as if weighing her options. Finally, she spoke. "I'm just trying to get by, Jack. That's all," she said simply. There was no hint of defensiveness in her voice, just the quiet acceptance of someone who had learned to live with the hand they were dealt. Jack nodded, understanding that she wasn't ready to open up. But that didn't stop him from wanting to know more. "I get that," he said, his tone earnest. "But I'm not just asking because you're a waitress. I'm asking because I believe there's more to you. You've got this presence, this confidence that you don't find in most people." Christina looked at him for a long moment, then finally let out a small sigh. "You're right," she admitted. "There is more to me than just serving drinks and food. But right now, this is what I do. And I've learned that it's enough for me, at least for now." Jack couldn't help but feel a mix of respect and frustration. He respected her decision to keep her life private, but he wanted to know the person behind the facade. He wasn't used to not getting what he wanted, and this was different. As the conversation lingered, Jack realized something. Christina wasn't looking for validation or sympathy. She wasn't playing a role to impress anyone. She was just living her life the best way she knew how, and there was something incredibly admirable about that. For the first time, Jack found himself respecting someone not because of their accomplishments or wealth, but because of their quiet resilience. As they talked, Jack couldn't help but feel that he had stumbled upon something rare, something real. And as the conversation drew to a close, he found himself saying, "I'd like to see you again, Christina. Outside of here, if you're open to it." She looked at him, her eyes searching his face for a moment, then nodded slowly. Maybe, she said, her voice soft but not dismissive. Maybe we'll see. The days after Jack's invitation passed slowly, with Christina constantly on his mind. He had tried to keep his usual routine, but something about the way their conversation ended left an impression on him that was hard to ignore. Every time he passed the restaurant, he found himself glancing through the window, hoping to see her again. The mystery of her lingered in his thoughts, and as much as he wanted to push it aside, he couldn't. She wasn't like anyone else he had ever met. A week later, Jack walked into the restaurant again, his heart beating a little faster than usual. He told himself it was just curiosity, just a passing need to satisfy his unanswered questions. But deep down, he knew it was more than that. He needed to see Christina again. As he entered, he immediately spotted her at the bar, wiping down the counter, her movements fluid and confident. She didn't look up when he entered, but Jack could feel her awareness of him as he walked closer. She greeted him with a small, polite smile, but there was a coolness in her demeanor that wasn't there the last time. "Back again, Mr. Anderson?" she asked, her voice neutral. Jack paused for a moment, realizing that this time, he would need to tread carefully. "I was hoping to talk," he said, his tone more serious than he had anticipated. Christina raised an eyebrow, and Jack noticed the subtle shift in her posture as she leaned back slightly. "Talk?" she repeated, clearly intrigued but not eager to engage. "I've been thinking about what you said," Jack continued, his voice steady but genuine. "About not wanting sympathy, and about where you are in life. I respect that, but I'd like to understand you more, if you're willing to share." For a moment, Christina was silent, her eyes flickering with something Jack couldn't quite read. She looked away briefly, collecting herself before answering. "I don't know if there's much to understand," she said quietly, her voice soft but firm. "I'm just living, Jack. Doing the best I can with what I've got." Jack nodded, feeling a sense of connection to her words. "I get it," he said slowly. "I do. But I think there's more to you than just surviving. I think you're capable of so much more, Christina." She met his gaze then, her eyes searching his face for a long moment. There was something different in her expression now, a flicker of something deeper, something Jack hadn't seen before. "You don't know me, Jack," she said softly, almost to herself. "You don't know what I've had to do to get here." Jack felt a pang in his chest. He had always been someone who could get what he wanted, someone who made things happen. But Christina? She had made it clear that she wasn't looking for someone to rescue her. She was just living. And yet, there was so much more under the surface. "I'm not here to judge you," Jack said quietly, his voice earnest. "I just want to understand you better. That's all." Christina seemed to soften at his words, her shoulders relaxing slightly. She exhaled slowly, then nodded. "I don't know if I can explain it all," she said, her tone more thoughtful now. "But I'll try." Jack smiled, a small, genuine smile. He hadn't expected this, hadn't expected her to open up even a little. It was progress, he realized, and it made him more determined than ever to get to know her better. He sat down at the bar, the tension between them easing as they both shared a moment of quiet understanding. There was a long road ahead, Jack knew, but for the first time, it didn't feel as daunting as it had before. In that quiet, unspoken connection, something began to shift between them, something real. The next few weeks unfolded with a subtle shift in the dynamic between Jack and Christina. After that night at the bar, things were different, more relaxed, but also more complicated. Jack found himself visiting the restaurant more often, not because he was hungry or needed something, but because he wanted to see her. The conversations they had started as small talk, but gradually grew deeper. Jack learned about Christina's family, her struggles, and the sacrifices she had made to get where she was. It wasn't easy for her to open up, but Jack could see that she was trying, in her own way, to let him in. She never asked for anything in return, and that's what Jack found so disarming. He had always been the one in control, the one who dictated the terms of his relationships. But with Christina, it was different. She wasn't interested in his wealth or status. She wasn't trying to impress him or win his approval. She was simply being herself. Jack admired that, even if it made him uncomfortable at times. One evening, as Jack sat at the bar, Christina brought him a glass of wine, her eyes meeting his with a slight smile. "You're here again," she remarked, her voice light, but with a hint of something more. Jack shrugged, trying to play it off, but the truth was, he couldn't stay away. "I like the company," he said, offering a small smile in return. Christina didn't say anything, but she placed the wine glass in front of him, lingering for a moment longer than usual. The air between them was thick with unspoken words, and Jack could feel it. "You know," Jack began, breaking the silence, "I've been thinking a lot about us." Christina raised an eyebrow, leaning against the counter as she listened. "US?" she repeated, her voice a mixture of curiosity and caution. Jack nodded, his eyes searching hers. "Yeah, I don't know what it is, but something about you, about us, feels different from anything I've experienced before." Christina didn't respond right away. She just watched him, as though trying to read his intentions. Finally, she spoke, her tone thoughtful. "I'm not looking for anything, Jack," she said quietly. "I'm just here. I'm just living." Jack's heart sank slightly at her words. He had been hoping for something more, but he understood her hesitation. She had been through too much, and she wasn't going to rush into anything, especially not with someone like him. "I get that," Jack replied, his voice soft. "I'm not asking for anything either. I just want to understand you better." Christina's eyes softened at his words, and for a moment, she seemed to let her guard down. "You don't have to understand me, Jack," she said quietly. "You just have to accept me as I am." Jack stared at her, his mind racing. This was the first time she had truly opened up to him, and it hit him harder than he expected. He had always believed that people needed to be fixed, that they needed to change to fit his world. But Christina wasn't like that. She was content in her own skin, and for the first time, Jack wondered if that was the key to everything he had been searching for. There was no grand gesture, no flashy declarations, just a quiet understanding that passed between them, something deeper than words could express. Jack realized, in that moment, that he wasn't trying to fix her. He was simply trying to be part of her world. And for the first time in a long time, he didn't feel the need to control everything. He didn't need to have all the answers. All he needed was to be with her, in this moment, exactly as they were. The weeks that followed were filled with subtle changes between Jack and Christina. The connection they had forged was quiet, yet undeniable, and every time Jack walked into the restaurant, there was a sense of ease between them that hadn't been there before. They would exchange smiles, brief conversations, and moments of understanding that spoke volumes. Jack had started to realize that being around her was no longer just about the curiosity that had initially brought him here. It was something deeper. He found himself more and more drawn to the way Christina moved through the world. Quiet, composed, yet unyielding. She wasn't trying to impress him or anyone else. She just existed, and that in itself was powerful. Jack had always surrounded himself with people who wanted something from him, whether it was business deals, money, or influence. But Christina? She had no agenda, no need for validation. That was something Jack wasn't used to, and it fascinated him. One evening, as Jack sat at the bar, he watched Christina move through the restaurant with an effortless grace, her focus on the tasks at hand. She was talking to a couple at the table next to him, her voice light and friendly, and then she glanced his way. Their eyes met across the room, and for a brief moment, time seemed to slow. Christina smiled, and it wasn't the polite smile she often wore for customers. It was genuine, soft, and Jack felt a warmth spread through him. As she walked over to him, Jack couldn't help but smile back. "You're in a good mood tonight," he said, watching her closely. Christina gave a slight shrug, but her smile didn't fade. "I guess I am," she replied, her voice light. "It's been a good evening." Jack studied her, his eyes lingering on her for a moment longer than usual. "You know," he said slowly, "I've been thinking a lot about you lately." Christina raised an eyebrow, her interest piqued. "Oh," she said, leaning against the bar. "And what exactly have you been thinking about?" Jack hesitated, not sure how to phrase it. "I don't know," he said finally. "Just that I can't remember the last time I felt this, connected to someone." Christina was quiet for a moment, her gaze softening as she took in his words. She seemed to consider something before replying, her voice quieter now. "I know what you mean," she said. "Sometimes, you just meet someone and things click. It doesn't have to be complicated." Jack nodded, feeling a sense of relief wash over him. It was as if she understood exactly what he meant without needing him to explain further. He had expected to be met with some kind of resistance, but instead, she was offering him the same honesty he had given her. For a moment, there was only the sound of the restaurant around them, the clinking of glasses and the murmur of conversation. Jack realized he didn't need to say anything more. They were on the same page, without needing to force the words. You. No, Jack said after a long pause. I've spent so much of my life chasing success, trying to build something that mattered. But I think, maybe this, right here, is the real success. Christina looked at him for a long moment, her eyes thoughtful. Maybe it is, she replied, her voice soft but steady. There was no grand declaration, no dramatic moment. Just the simple understanding that sometimes, the best things in life didn't need to be earned or fought for. They simply existed. And right now, for Jack and Christina, that was enough.